Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into something pretty interesting today, appreciative inquiry. It's this whole approach to organizational development, but get this, it actually focuses on what's already working well, rather than just jumping on problems.
Yeah, it kind of flips the script, doesn't it?
Totally. It's about amplifying those strengths instead of always trying to fix what's broken.
Our source material today is actually a course description.
Oh, cool. Where's it from?
It's from Academy Europe, and you know what? They have this really interesting analogy. They talk about how it's like assessing the conditions where an organization is at its best.
Instead of dissecting failures, right?
Right. So, like, instead of focusing on why a project tanked, you'd be digging into what made a similar project super successful.
Oh, I see what you mean. So it's kind of like figuring out what makes an athlete win gold, rather than just focusing on when they lose, right?
Exactly. That's the whole idea behind appreciative inquiry. And just imagine the impact that shift in focus can have on a team.
Instead of everyone stressing over mistakes, you're celebrating wins and figuring out how to get more of them.
Yeah.
So now I'm curious, like, how does this actually help managers in the real world?
Well, the course description talks about how appreciative inquiry can help managers bring out the best in their teams.
Okay.
And it can even lead to better productivity.
Oh, wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating how it works. See, by focusing on strengths, you're basically like training your team to see and use their own unique talents, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, say you have someone who's amazing at creative problem solving,
Uh-huh.
but maybe that gets overlooked sometimes because everyone's just rushing to meet deadlines.
That happens all the time.
Appreciative inquiry would say, hold on, let's highlight that strength.
Oh, I see.
And when you do that, it's not just about boosting that person's confidence, it's also about getting more innovative solutions for the whole team.
So it's like a win-win. It helps the individual and the whole team becomes more effective.
Yeah, precisely. And that's where those long-term productivity gains come from, too. When a team feels valued for what makes them unique, they're going to be way more engaged and motivated, which ultimately means, yeah, more productive.
All right, so let's talk about this Academy Europe course itself. What's the setup like?
Well, it's a 10-week program, all online, broken down into 10 lessons.
Okay, got it.
And it's open to all levels, which is great. So, like, it doesn't matter if you're a super experienced manager or just starting out, this course gives you a solid foundation in appreciative inquiry.
That makes sense. And it sounds like they made it easy to access too, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned video and text.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It seems like they get that people learn in different ways.
Right.
So they designed the course to be flexible. And on top of that, they have these digital support resources.
Ooh, what are those?
Well, think of it like a toolbox for putting appreciative inquiry into action.
Okay, so they give you more than just the theory.
Right. They have things like spreadsheets to track team successes,
Oh, that's cool.
and you can use them to spot patterns. Plus, they've got discussion questions.
What kind of questions?
Well, stuff to get you brainstorming with your team and really digging into those strengths, you know?
So it's not just theoretical, they actually help you apply it.
Exactly. That's what makes it valuable. It's not just about understanding appreciative inquiry. It's about having the skills to use it in your actual work.
That makes sense. So it sounds like an awesome course, but who exactly is it for?
Well, they mention a few things in the description. They say you need to be disciplined.
Uh-huh.
You need to have strong research skills and obviously a desire to learn.
Sounds like our kind of audience.
For
Yeah.
sure. But you know what else they mention?
What can that?
They say you need patience to interpret technical scientific data.
Oh, interesting.
That kind of makes me wonder what kind of data they're using to analyze all those organizational strengths.
Yeah, that's a good point. It seems like there's a bit more to it than just warm, fuzzy feelings.
Definitely.
There's some serious data analysis going on.
Right. It's intriguing.
Definitely makes me want to learn more.
Me too.
Okay, so we've talked about what appreciative inquiry is and why it's so powerful, but how does it actually work? Like, if you're a manager and you want to try this with your team, where do you even begin?
Well, the first step is kind of unexpected, I think.
Oh, how so?
Well, instead of, jumping right into problem-solving mode, you'd actually start by identifying a time when your team was just killing it.
Oh, like a peak experience.
Exactly. A moment where everything clicked and you achieved some amazing results.
Got it.
So you'd get everyone together and ask them to share their memories and insights from that specific project or moment, whatever it was.
Interesting. So instead of saying, hey team, why are we always missing deadlines? You'd be like, Remember that time we launched that product flawlessly? Let's talk about what made that such a success.
Yeah, exactly. You're basically tapping into this collective memory bank of what works well for your team.
I like that. A memory bank of success.
Right. And then you can start to analyze the patterns and principles that contributed to that success.
Okay, so what kinds of things would you look for?
Well, you'd ask things like, what specific actions did people take? Were there certain communication styles that were super effective? What kind of environment helped foster that peak performance?
It's like reverse engineering a win.
Right.
Instead of dissecting a failure, you're deconstructing a success to figure out the secret sauce.
I love that. Yeah, and by doing this, you're shifting the team's whole mindset. Instead of dwelling on problems, they're recognizing and replicating their own strengths.
And then what? Once you've figured out those key ingredients, what's next?
Well, then you start brainstorming ways to apply them in other areas.
Okay.
So, for example, maybe there's a process that worked exceptionally well during that product launch.
Right.
Could you tweak that process for other projects?
I see.
Or maybe there was a communication strategy that kept everyone aligned and motivated.
Yeah.
How can you weave that into your everyday workflow?
So you take those little nuggets of wisdom from past successes and you turn them into real strategies.
Precisely. It's about using those positive experiences as fuel for continuous improvement.
I like that. It's not just about remembering the good old days. It's about learning from them and getting better.
Exactly.
Now, speaking of practical application, you mentioned these digital support resources earlier. How do those fit into the Academy Europe course?
Oh, yeah. Those are really cool. They're basically your Appreciative Inquiry toolkit,
Okay.
They give you concrete tools to guide you through the process. Like, for example, they have spreadsheets that can help you track team successes and identify those recurring patterns.
So you could log every time your team hits a big milestone or gets great feedback from a client.
Exactly. And then when you look at that data, you might find that certain types of projects always bring out the best in your team, or that a certain way of talking to clients always leads to good results.
It's a way to get some real insights into your team's strengths.
Yeah. And they also have discussion questions in there, too.
Oh, right. You mentioned those before. What are those like?
Well, they're designed to spark conversations about your team's strengths.
Okay.
They can help you lead brainstorming sessions, encourage people to talk openly, and make sure everyone feels heard and valued.
So it's a mix of data and dialogue. You're gathering hard evidence, but also creating a space for open communication.
Exactly. It's not just about numbers or just talking. It's about bringing those two together.
It sounds like it creates a pretty powerful experience for everyone involved.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, all this talk about data reminds me of that interesting bit from the course description, the patience to interpret technical scientific data. What kind of data are we talking about here? How does it fit into the whole appreciative inquiry thing?
That's a great question, and I honestly don't know for sure without taking the course myself.
Yeah, fair enough.
But it definitely makes you curious, right? Like, are they using some kind of fancy data analysis to figure out what those organizational strengths are?
Going beyond just stories and gut feelings.
Right. It seems like they're combining the human touch with the power of data.
So what kind of data do you think they might be using?
It could be anything, really. Like maybe employee surveys,
Okay.
performance metrics,
Uh-huh.
customer feedback,
Right.
project outcomes.
I see.
Imagine looking at all that and seeing where employees feel most engaged or which projects always exceed expectations.
You're getting a really well-rounded picture of what's working well.
Exactly. And when you combine that with what you've learned from those conversations and reflections, you get an even deeper understanding of the team's strengths.
So smart. It's like using different tools to examine your team's strengths from all angles.
Right. And it helps make sure you're not just relying on assumptions or biases.
Okay, let's shift gears for a second. Talk about Academy Europe itself. We mentioned their MBA program earlier. What can you tell us about that?
Sure, it's a 6-term program that covers a whole range of business topics. But what's really interesting is that they don't just teach these topics in isolation.
What do you mean?
Well, for example, they don't just teach finance as a standalone thing. They connect it to other areas like management, economics, even technology.
So it's a really interconnected approach.
Exactly. It's about understanding how everything fits together, which, kind of aligns with the whole idea of appreciative inquiry.
I see what you mean. It's about seeing the strengths and potential within a whole system.
Yeah, exactly.
And don't forget, they also offer those free courses on their website.
Oh, yeah. That's great for anyone who wants to learn something new.
It makes learning really accessible.
Right. And those free courses cover a ton of different topics too: leadership, communication, project management, data analysis, you name it.
So they're really committed to sharing knowledge and helping people grow.
For sure. It seems like they really believe in the power of education.
Now, what about those certifications? You mentioned earlier that Academy Europe really emphasizes them.
Yeah, they offer certifications for a lot of their courses, even the free ones.
Oh, that's cool.
It's a great way for people to show what they've learned.
Yeah, that can be really helpful, especially if you're trying to get a new job or move up in your career.
Exactly. And it also ties back to their idea of empowering people, By giving them certifications, they're giving them something tangible to show for their hard work.
So, to recap this part of our dive, we've really gotten into the nitty-gritty of appreciative inquiry, how it works in practice, and how Academy Europe supports that process.
We've also talked about their broader approach to education with their MBA program and those free courses, and how they really seem to value making knowledge accessible to everyone.
But the big question is, how can all of this apply to you, the listener? We'll get into that more in the last part of our deep dive. All right, so we've explored the core principles of appreciative inquiry and looked at how Academy Europe's course can help put it all into practice. Now, in this final part, I think it's time to make it personal. How can we actually apply this in our own lives?
It's been really fascinating unpacking all this, hasn't it? I think what really stands out to me is how appreciative inquiry challenges that whole fix-it mentality.
You mean always focusing on what's wrong?
Yeah. Instead, it's like, hey, let's look for what's already working and build on that.
I gotta say, it is a refreshing change of pace, isn't it? Instead of always feeling like we're putting out fires, we're looking for those sparks of success.
Absolutely. And that shift in perspective can totally change the vibe of a whole organization.
Right. It's almost like everyone's putting on rose-colored glasses,
Yeah.
but in a good way, you know?
Yeah. It's about focusing on the positive and seeing the potential for growth in every situation. And that's not just for individuals, it's for the whole organization.
So it's like creating a more positive and supportive culture for everyone.
Exactly. A culture where people feel valued and encouraged to be their best.
You know, before we wrap up, I can't let us forget that little detail from the course description: patience to interpret technical scientific data. It really gets you thinking, what kind of data are they using in this course?
It really does. I wish they went into more detail, but it seems like they're using data to back up their observations about organizational strengths. It's not just about gut feelings.
Right, so they're blending the human side of appreciating strengths with the analytical power of data.
Exactly. Like, imagine looking at employee surveys and seeing where people feel most motivated.
Or maybe analyzing project outcomes to see what consistently exceeds expectations.
Right. And then you combine that with everything you've gathered from conversations and reflections.
That's such a smart approach. It's like getting a 360-degree view of what's working well.
Absolutely. You're grounding the appreciative inquiry process in solid evidence.
Okay, so now that we've reached the end of this deep dive, let's talk about you, the listener. We've spent all this time on how this works for organizations, but appreciative inquiry can actually be applied to our personal lives, too.
Right. How can we take these ideas and use them for ourselves?
I think it all starts with changing how we see things. Instead of focusing on our weaknesses, what if we took some time to appreciate our strengths?
Like, what are we truly good at? What brings us joy? What are we proud of?
That's a great place to start. It's all about celebrating our wins, big and small.
Exactly. And then how can we use those strengths to reach our goals and live a more fulfilling life?
It's like taking that appreciative inquiry lens and focusing it on our own personal growth.
Maybe there's a hobby you love that could become a side hustle, or a skill you've always wanted to learn that could open new doors.
It's about seeing ourselves through a strengths-based lens and then taking action.
And don't forget, this applies to our relationships too.
Oh, that's such a good point.
Yeah.
What if we focused on the strengths of the people we love and admire? How does that make our lives better?
Right. Instead of dwelling on the negatives, what if we celebrated those positive qualities?
It's a simple shift, but so powerful.
It really is.
So I think the biggest takeaway here is that appreciative inquiry is more than just a tool. It's a philosophy. It's about seeing the world with a focus on what's good, what's possible, and the potential we all have.
It's about looking for those sparks of success everywhere.
Absolutely. And you know what? Who knows what incredible things you might achieve when you start approaching life with this kind of positivity and energy. You might surprise yourself. So as you go about your day, remember to look for the good, appreciate those strengths, and never underestimate the power of what's possible. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.